Welcome. My name is Guimel DeCarvalho. I'm one of the co-coordinators of Natick Is United. I want to welcome you to this racial justice dialogue with Natick Police Department and town officials. We're really excited to be able to provide this panel to you, to Natick residents. We will be recording this session, just so you're all aware, and you'll be able to find the recording of this on the Natick Is United website after the fact. I'll also be putting in various links into the Q&A for those of you who would be interested in finding some information there. Why are we here? Our goal is to open a dialogue with the Natick Police Department and the town, and have our town officials who are associated and interact with the Natick Police Department here as well to participate in the conversation. So the focus today for this conversation will be about law enforcement and racial justice in the town of Natick. I want to remind you all that you can put questions into the Q&A feature. I will be looking through those and monitoring them for the panel, and bringing those questions up when they're appropriate. And we've received many questions from you all already via email, and so we've already incorporated some of those questions into the questions that you're going to hear tonight. So just before we get started, I want to give a very brief introduction to our panelists and to our facilitators for tonight. We have with us Chief James Hicks. He's been in law enforcement for over 30 years. He is the Chief of Police of Natick and has been since 2011. Chief Hicks has had the opportunity to hold many leadership roles in his extensive career, including President of the Massachusetts Chief of Police Association, President of the Middlesex Chiefs of Police Association, and various other places. Chief Hicks currently serves as a member of Natick Is United and the Natick Freedom Team. We have with us as well Lieutenant Carra Rossi, who has been in the Natick Police Department for 26 years. She's served in different capacities, from patrol officer, patrol sergeant, and now as lieutenant and the commander of the operations division, which includes patrol. Lieutenant Rossi also serves as the public information officer and social media coordinator for Natick PD, and has participated in a variety of other organizations, including Natick 180 and the Opioid Task Force. We also have with us a select person, Sue Salamoff. She is a longtime Natick resident, has a great history of service of this town, and is currently a Natick selectman and a member of several organizations and committees, such as Natick 180, Natick Is United, the Freedom Team, and Town Meeting. She's a former member of the Personnel Board, Community Senior Center Building Committee, and various other organizations in town. We also have select person Karen Adelman-Foster. She is the vice chair of the Natick Board of Selectmen. She's previously served as a member of the Natick School Committee for 6 years and on town meeting for 20 years. Karen works at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council and as its senior communications strategist. And from the schools, we have Dr. Anna Nolin. She's the superintendent of schools for Natick Public Schools, where she's worked in various leadership capacities for the past 17 years. She's worked as a middle-level educator in Metro West for the past 24 years in drama, grant writing, curriculum developer, and as a consultant. We're very happy to have her as well. She does currently also serve as a member of Natick Is United. And for our facilitators, we have Melissa Patrick. Melissa Patrick is a Natick resident and is an educator, social worker, and learning and development specialist. She brings a robust interdisciplinary background to her work as a diversity, equity, and inclusion professional. Melissa is committed to advancing equity and social justice and has devoted her professional life to doing just this. She has worked with clients in various sectors such as education, healthcare, finance, faith-based organizations, social service, and government agencies. We also have Lindsey Galvao. Lindsey is a Natick resident and a teacher of U.S. history at the Dana Hall School in Wellesley. She's previously worked for Representative David Linsky's office and has taught at several area schools. Lindsey has worked with Melissa Patrick to bring diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives to Natick for the past 3 years. So I just want to welcome all of our panelists, and I'd like to pass it over to Melissa to get us started. Melissa, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Thank you for that, Guimel. Okay, so I'm modeling. If you want to talk, you must unmute. Thank you, Guimel, and welcome everybody to this first panel that Natick Is United is sponsoring. And hopefully this is the first of several that Natick Is United will hold. So because this is our first, please be aware that it's our first, and we're learning how to hold these virtual town conversations. So I'm going to get started and actually ask the first question to Chief Hicks. And we've, so I'm going to start this first question to you, Chief Hicks. I will be, got some notes down here. So Chief Hicks, what has the Natick Police Department done well regarding anti-racist and de-escalation training? And how can we improve transparency of police accountability, especially regarding the use of force and police misconduct?
Well, thank you, Melissa, and thanks for having us here this evening. Several good questions within there, and hopefully it'll only take me less than an hour and a half to get through it. But starting off, seriously, I think that as an organization, the police department knows and understands the complicated role that it plays in any society, in any community. And part of that is understanding that they have to be a partner in it. So your first part of the question is what have we done well? I think that we'll start right from the beginning. And as you mentioned earlier, I have Lieutenant Carra Rossi, who's here, who can also step in as part of her role. It has to start with setting the standards and setting the guidelines within the organization. And we've done that through our understanding, through our trainings, through our statements about ethics and acceptance within the community. Our mission statement expresses that. So we start from the beginning in our hiring. In our hiring, we as part of our review, we are looking for candidates who are of high quality, high ethics, and high values. Those who understand the role they play, and those who read or heard my statement that I wrote earlier when I presented at the Board of Selectmen after the death of George Floyd. I stand by that. So our officers are ones that are high and have values that reflect what we want them to have in understanding, and part of that is empathy, and also understanding that we aren't perfect, but we need to learn how to get there. So that's the first part. That's the hiring. After they're hiring, now they have to be trained. And especially with my position, I'm lucky enough to be chairman of the statewide Municipal Police Training Committee, which is responsible for setting the standards for training in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for all police officers. And I can say in over 10 years that I've been on this committee, the committee and the training for those officers who are becoming police officers for the first time, the focus is of all the material in the training curriculum, the 26 weeks, is around community policing and understanding of the environment in which officers work in. And that means empathy. That means being able to interact with many different cultures. That means some of the things that we're hearing now, de-escalation, communication skills, and that's constantly drilled into them throughout the entire time they're there for the 26 weeks. So that they understand that as police officers, especially in the 21st century, that they have to have these skills. They have to have an understanding of the community they went in. They have to have empathy, and they have to understand their weaknesses, and they have to understand where they can improve. So that leads me to how now we get them back into our departments at the local level, and now we have a responsibility. We have the responsibility to build on that training that they have received at the academy, and also train them to understand how we want them to interact with our community and for those who work here and pass through here. And that goes around many tenets that we have. And I'm still focusing on the successes as we talk about what have we done for training within our department, meaning the Natick Police Department has taken it upon themselves to do additional training around implicit bias and several others, which I'm actually going to turn it over to Lieutenant Rossi, who is responsible for this type of training, to describe what do we do for the officers that are here in Natick.
Thanks, Chief. So it was back in 2015, so we're kind of ahead of, I like to think we're ahead of most other states here in Massachusetts. It was decided that we were going to have a 2-year series of trainings for every officer in the Commonwealth. We wanted officers to understand bias. We wanted them to understand the difference between explicit and illicit bias. We wanted them to understand, how to not police to a bias. So it was actually Las Vegas Police Department that had some issues with the use of force. They came to Massachusetts after they went through all of this training, and we did a train the trainer through the Municipal Police Training Council. So I was one of the people fortunate enough by Chief Hicks to be sent to this train the trainer, and I worked alongside a lieutenant from the Framingham Police Department, and Natick and Framingham co-trained on this 2-year process of training. So we wanted to understand what are biases? How do you recognize a bias? How do you make sure that you don't police to a bias? And, it's a difficult subject for any of us to confront, that we all have biases, every single one of us, whether we understand it or not. The fact that we can recognize an implicit bias and we can work to get through that together was a huge step for law enforcement in the Commonwealth. I know it was for our department. And through that training, and I know we train continuously, we're very fortunate. The town never skimps on dollars for training. We're always, and I see Sue smiling because she knows I'm right. You want your employees to be trained to the highest level possible. I'm sure it's the same, Dr. Nolin, in the school system. It's the same for all of us. We're very, very fortunate in Natick that we train constantly. It's not enough to get out of the academy and say, okay, you're trained. You have your training. We train constantly. So this is something that we work on, we continue to work on. And do we have a lot of work left to do? Yes, all of us do. And we want a seat at that table. We want a seat at the table of change for this community, for this state, for this country. And we're willing to be a part of that. We just hope that people allow us in.
Yeah. Lieutenant Rossi and Chief Hicks, thank you for that. Before we move on to some of the other questions, I do just want to touch upon the issue in terms of the staffing of Natick PD. I think it's important, certainly as a Black woman, a parent, a Natick resident, I would like to know about who we recruit to work on the Natick Police Department force and in the department. So if you could speak a little bit about the recruitment strategies.
We talk about this all the time.
Okay.
Yes, and so that people understand, we fall under, the town of Natick falls under the state civil service system. What that means is that we are bound by the rules and guidelines for a hiring process. And the first step of that process is taking the statewide civil service exam. So we're a little bit, our hands are a little bit tied as far as recruitment. We can recruit and encourage females, minorities, bilingual. We can encourage them, and we have, to take the exam. However, when it comes time to hire, we have to go off of a standardized list in which, number one, veterans have absolute preference. So as a veteran, you go to the top of the list. And then after you hire your veterans, then you have the rest of the list to look at, with preference given to Natick residents. Now, for those who don't understand civil service, may not understand how that's a little bit, it makes it a little bit difficult to not only recruit, but also look at the diversity and increase the diversity within your organization. Because what that means is that if someone who is diverse or may be too far on the list, and although we see them and they may be strong candidates, and is someone who we know and someone we encourage to take the exam, either we saw them when they were in middle school and then we saw them grow through high school and into college, and we encourage them to take the test. If they don't do well on the test on that particular day, we never get an opportunity to consider them to hire them. That's the system we have. That's the system we have to work with. And it's a challenge. I will admit, it is a challenge in this system with civil service to be able to get to those candidates. Because like I said, a perfect example, if you're hiring one candidate, if you have one spot, the rules and guidelines only allow you to look at the top 3 candidates, and that's it. That's it. So you get the top 3 candidates to look at. And that's what's difficult. So it's something, and we're not the only ones. So Natick is not the only one that's part of the civil service system. And I think you've heard that come up, especially in the last week or so, through the legislators looking at that as looking at the civil service system and the way we hire and, police officers, especially in the Commonwealth. How can we improve on that? So Melissa, that's a good question, and I'd like to say we can do better, and we do. We do actively encourage candidates who are diverse to take the exam, but after that, it all depends on how they do on that particular morning and where they end up on the list how we can hire.
Or Chief,
I'm sorry, just if you don't mind, there's a quick follow-up question that's very related to this. You may not be able to answer, but there's been a couple of questions put in the chat about whether or not this test may be biased, and that might not be an answer that you can give because you're not the person who wrote the test or involved in the managing of the test, but just wanted to speak that.
Guimel, you're right. I can't answer to that because the test is actually administered and overseen by the state, Human Resource Division, Civil Service. So that falls under them, and they have the requirements and the standards that they have to look at, because they contract out to have it developed. So I don't know that, I can't say, and I don't want to say definitively that that's the case, but that's their role to oversee that process.
And it's also, if I might, who's taking the test? Who are we mentoring? Who is seeing the test come up and saying, I want to take this test? So that's what we need to work on. We need to work better, I think, on recruiting people to be interested in the job. So who's going to take the test? It doesn't necessarily mean the test is biased, but people may not be interested in taking the test because they don't see people like them in the roles, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much, Police Chief Hicks and Lieutenant Rossi. We really appreciate that input. And I wanted to address another follow-up. We had seen this in our emails multiple times, but Lieutenant Rossi, could you please take us through the process for filing report of police misconduct? And how is the department held accountable with this information?
Sure. So if someone comes in or calls with a complaint, the supervisor on duty, which would be a sergeant, there's always a sergeant that's in charge of a particular shift, they would be the person to intake and formalize a complaint. It's usually over the phone, sometimes in person, so they'll handwrite their first report of what is being complained about. Sometimes it may be a person in custody making a complaint. However the complaint comes in, the first line supervisor will take the complaint. It then goes up to my office, and at that point, I'll bring it to the attention of the chief and I'll assign it out for investigation. From that point, an investigation is done. The complainant is mailed or hand-given a more descriptive, formal complaint form that they're going to fill out. They can type it, they can email it, however they feel most comfortable. They get it to us and the investigation ensues. Once the investigation is complete, it's turned over to Chief Hicks, and he'll make an ultimate decision on what discipline, if any, and the outcome of the complaint.
There's a quick follow-up that's helpful here from the Q&A. Has anyone, a police officer or a member of the public, filed a complaint against the Natick PD for race bias in the past 5 years or so? Not that you would be able to speak about a specific complaint, but just have there been complaints filed in the last 5 years?
Chief?
Yeah, are we talking specifically bias? Guimel, was that the question?
That's the question, but I would, imagine that you would answer it however you feel is appropriate.
If it's a complaint about bias, specific bias, the answer would be no. If there has been complaints about how officers conduct themselves in general, whether it's rudeness or disrespect and things like that. But as far as in I can say even the 9 years I've been here, there hasn't been a complaint specifically about bias. It may be complaints about how the officer acted at the time, but nothing that I can recall. I just did a quick review over the last 5 years that specifically mentioned, or the specific complaint was about bias.
Okay, thank you.
Can I go back? There's a part of the question that we didn't answer that Melissa asked that actually is a good follow-up about investigations, and that was, how do we improve the transparency around these complaints? And I think it's important. We've heard this a lot, and whether it be nationally or whether it be at the state. Lieutenant Rossi just described a process that for us is important, and it's important that we hold each and every member of the organization accountable, whether they be sworn officers or civilians, to rules and regulations, policies, procedures, and the basic ethics that we expect of them. And we investigate those, because not every complaint, Lieutenant Rossi just described a complaint if it comes from outside the organizations. There's also complaints that's filed internally. If someone feels that someone is not adhering to our policies and guidelines, those are also complaints. So the question is how do we know that the Natick Police Department is being transparent? I can tell you this, is that we are constantly looking to our policies and procedures as the ultimate guidelines as how do we act as employees of the police department and of the town. And the expectation is those get followed. If they don't, then there will be a process. I know one of the questions that I've heard a couple times is that how come these can't be done in public? And how come it's not able, because it's the law. And it's a law that we, obviously we have to follow. Because of the way the law is stated that discipline is not public in a Commonwealth, unless the person who's being disciplined wants it to be public. That's the only way it can go public. So these are carried out. So we have to do the best we can to let people know that we adhere by our process and continue to adhere by the process to hold each other accountable. And I'm sorry, that's the best that we can say right now, because that is the law. I just wanted to cover that. Melissa, I'm sorry, we kind of went right over that part of the question.
That's okay. Thank you for going back to that, though. Thank you. Okay. Okay. So let's see. I see. Okay. let's see. I think what I might do right now is we have questions that are geared towards the Board of Selectmen, as well as questions that are geared towards the school department. I think before moving to the school department, I would like to get a couple questions out towards the select persons. This next question goes to select person Adelman-Foster. My question to you is, could you give a little bit more information about what oversight the Board of Selectmen has over the Natick Police Department for our listening and listening viewers? You need to take yourself off mute.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
And thank you to Natick Is United for this panel. Just to preface my answer a little bit, you may have noticed I'm white, which means I'm going to have a ton of blind spots on these issues, and I wish that weren't true, but it is. I have to be realistic. So to counter that, it means I need to listen a lot, and especially hard. And if people have feedback, I hope they will email me. And I'm going to ask Natick Is United to put my email address on my bio. And just there's such a catastrophic history and present of interactions between Black people and the justice system. Black people, Indian people, people of color, and others have had and continue to have had and continue to have horrific experiences with policing. But we're not here to talk about policing, but our work here in Natick. And I just want to say that I'm really proud of our chief and our Natick officers. Everything I know about what we're doing tells me that we're doing so much here. Every time I've asked a question of our chief, I hear something I'm proud of. And many of the reforms that I hear getting talked about when folks talk about defunding the police, we're actually already doing. As I say that, though, I have to say I know that this may be a blind spot for me, that the actual lived experience of Black people and people of color, even here in Natick, may be different than what we hope and what we assume. And outrageous things can happen here in Metro West. I'm thinking here of Yuri Stamps, who was killed in Framingham only 10 years ago. But we really are doing a lot of great stuff here, for real. And there's so many stories of incredible community connection and of doing good and doing right. And I just don't want that to be lost in the conversation. But that said, we have to listen a lot and create new ways to listen. And then we have to act so we can do even better. So that said, board oversight of the police, the Board of Selectmen, which, by the way, I hope will be changed in name after the election on June 30th to the Select Board, but which is still officially called the Board of Selectmen, is the chief executive board in town. But we are specifically prevented by charter, that's our constitution, from participating in the day-to-day workings of the town. So we work only through policy and only through votes. Under Massachusetts General Law 97A, I looked it up, the board appoints and can fire the chief of police and all sworn officers. We also set their compensation. When it comes to the chief, the board sets his or her compensation directly with the advice of the town administrator. And for officers and other police officers and police employees, the board negotiates compensation via the unions and the town administrator. Another kind of oversight that the board has is that it establishes or it supports or doesn't policy objectives for the town administrator, which are then reflected in the town administrator's budget proposal, one hopes, and which in turn funds the police department. So the budget itself is a kind of oversight, at least establishing the priorities for the budget can be a kind of oversight. The budget itself, however, is only passed through town meeting. The board supports or does not policy objectives for the chief, which are reflected in policies such as the social worker ride-alongs that I hope the chief will have a chance to tell people about that we do here in Natick. It's the chief who manages and operates the department, however. That includes matters of discipline that call for measures like warnings, letters of reprimand, and even matters that involve suspensions up to 5 days. For major infractions, the Board of Selectmen decides. That's for matters that involve suspensions of over 5 days or suspension or of termination. And I'm happy to say we haven't had many of them in my year. But by law, as the chief was saying before, that is all in executive session and private, as it is true for any town employee. I assure you that we take these oversight measures really seriously. And that is all I have to say.
I just want to add.
Sue, did you want to add something?
Yes, I did. Thank you. I just wanted to add some of the positives that my colleague just mentioned. For example, if somebody is homeless, the police department has vouchers, and it's through Lieutenant Carra Rossi, his position, and we give somebody the opportunity to spend the night in a local motel. I've lost.
So
you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, I'll just keep speaking. Also, we take very seriously mental health issues, and that's an initiative of the Natick Police Department to have a social worker as part of our department, and the chief can speak more about the specifics. In addition, the leadership of Chief Hicks and Lieutenant Rossi in participation in what was first the Natick Opioid Task Force, which is now merged with Natick Together for Youth, is now Natick 180. So in the town of Natick, addiction is considered an illness. It's not considered criminal behavior. So I guess the community isn't necessarily familiar with these very positive actions that are with our police department. And I'm going to try to get back on.
Can I just, there's a question that came in the Q&A that I think might be really helpful to hear, maybe from you, Select Person Adelman-Foster. Someone asked, they're currently experiencing discrimination and inequality in this town, and it is from residents and town board members. What should they do? Who should they contact to be heard?
Actually, could I pick up on that, because I've been involved with it as a member of the Freedom Team?
If you feel you can answer that, yes.
Yes. It's basically two questions. One, the Freedom Team is a citizens organization that emerged from Natick Is United, that takes on any issues that individuals or bring forward regarding matters of discrimination or disrespect. And so the Freedom Team is the right group for somebody to bring a matter to their attention, and they work with the individual or individuals as a citizens group. In terms of concerns with a board action, I suggest the individuals contact the Board of Selectmen for a process.
Sue, thank you very much.
Yeah, if I could add to that, if we're talking about a hate crime, please call the police.
Right.
Um,
Thank you.
if you're talking about racism manifested by fellow citizens, fellow residents, that fall short of hate crimes, we want to know, but there may not be much we can do about it other than generally fight racism. I may be wrong, but we sure want to know, because we want to do what we can to fight racism in this town. If it's by a board, we certainly want to know. There are, I don't know what the process would be, frankly. I think we need to speak to lawyers to understand how to handle that, but we want to know. I think the bottom line is we want to know. Even if I don't have a process at the tip of my tongue, we want to know.
Thanks.
Sorry, there's just someone wanted to clarify, what is the Freedom Team, just because it's been said a couple of times. So
yeah, and Guimel, I'm going to pick up on this to facilitate onward. Chief Hicks, first of all, you did mention it. If you could just describe the Freedom Team one more time. And we do have on the Natick Is United website, there is the phone number in terms of how you can contact the Freedom Team. Chief Hicks, I'm also going to ask, after you describe the Freedom Team, if you could speak to whether or not the Natick Police Department has a written policy regarding the use of force in effecting an arrest. And then I'm also curious, either you or Lieutenant Rossi could speak to the issue of body cameras. Thank you.
Okay, I'll start off with the Freedom Team. The Freedom Team is I would say an arm of Natick Is United. It came about through resident Guimel Adams, who wanted to be able to bring together a group of residents to include students, all aspects of the town, to form a group that can be responsive. And when I say responsive, Natick Is United is a bigger group that looks at the issues around discrimination and racism, and helps to educate, holds forums and things like that. But Guimel, and when he sat with me, said that we need to have a group that when these incidents and acts are identified, we need to be able to respond. There is no, at the town level, there's no official group or organization or committee for that. So this is a group that's grassroots, made up of citizens, and like I said, students who come together, and if there's an identified incident of discrimination or racism, this group, to put it simply, is meant to be the reactors, the actors that go out to the victims of these type of incidents. And as I want to use Jamel's word here because it's perfect, and wrap our arms around them and say, we're here to help you get through this. Let's sit and talk and say, what can we do to help you through this? And the group is there to listen, to advise if need be, but to be a helping hand to guide someone through an incident. And in some cases, we've had people who have come to us and said they just want to talk and they just want to know that they have someone there if needed. And that was the extent. One incident that did occur that is worthy of knowing is that it was with a local business. And, the Freedom Team sat down with the individual and also sat down with the owners and managers of the business, and we talked through it. And then we were able to get some changes made within that business, including getting them, they decided to train all their employees on bias after we sat and spoke with them. So the Freedom Team, as a result, has put together a hotline, and it's a hotline that if there is bias type racist actions, you can call the hotline. The hotline is 647-9548. And that hotline is also on the Natick Is United website also. And the purpose of the hotline, and that hotline was approved by the Board of Selectmen because it is a town of Natick line. The hotline is answered directly by me. Meaning if there's usually a message left, I hear about the message, I immediately take the message and I have to triage it. If it's an incident that I feel it rises up to the level of a crime and requires investigation, I will start that investigation, whether it be using the Attorney General's office or locally, and go in that method, especially if it rises to the level of a hate crime. If it doesn't rise to that level, but yet it's something that we need to talk through as a team and as a town, we will sit and have those conversations, discussions with the victim, and talk about next steps. So that's the freedom team. That's if you look at it as someone who wants to step up and say that we want to help you, we want to support you, and that's what we want to do. That's what the freedom team does. And just I know as a chief, I'm on the freedom team, and Ms. Salamoff is on the freedom team, but it's a grassroots group. Just like Natick Is United is a grassroots groups of residents, and the group is such that we have students on it, which is very, very important because there's perspectives there from the student level that we also talk about, students who may feel that they are discriminated against, that they're brought forward by those students to help support other students. We do have representatives from the schools. We have Principal Harrigan on the group. So that's the team and how it operates. Now, Melissa, you had two other questions.
Yes, Chief Hicks, yes. I had a question about does Natick PD have a written policy about the use of force? And hold on, I'm going to find it. And in effecting an arrest, and if you could speak to body cams, do police officers here in Natick wear them? If so, when? If not, why?
Okay, I will take the first one, and I'll let Lieutenant Rossi take the second one.
Okay, and then we do have more questions for Superintendent Dr. Nolin as well.
The Natick Police Department does have a use of force policy, and with any policy that we have, especially the use of force policy, which is a complex policy and it has to evolve based on tactics and models that come up. Our policy, when you said earlier, I forgot who it was said earlier, I think it was Karen who said when we look at some of the proposals that's out there today, especially the 8-for-8, in that group, we look at our policy and we already do that. So the use of chokeholds, although I have to say it is not explicitly written in our policy, as far as training is concerned, as in the training elements and in the training documents, it is not taught. It's taught that it's not allowed, going back to the academy. And we do defensive tactics training every year, and that's emphasized. So as we're updating our policy, that will be placed into our policy so that it's codified. Some of the other areas we talked about that I heard, and I won't go through all of them, but warnings. We've always trained that you warn someone if you're going to use force. That is part of the training. That's part of de-escalation training. The first part of de-escalation is talking to people. And we try to train officers that you shouldn't have to use defensive tactics unless you absolutely need to, but your voice and your presence is your best element to control a situation. And they're taught that from day one, and they're taught that every year. So our policy also has a de-escalation, as well as you can escalate force, but you also can de-escalate force. And that's strictly written into our training and into our policy. So long-winded answer, but I know there's a lot of discussion about those areas, especially around our policy on force. And like I said, it just happened to be we're smack dab in the middle of finalizing our updated policy when we went back to all the things that we've been hearing and realize that we do them all, and most of them are in our new policy, which is going to be issued shortly.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll let Lieutenant Rossi talk about body cameras.
So, Chief, one thing I just wanted to mention is that we've all been trained in verbal judo. That was well before, I think, anyone else. I'm going back to the point when I think I was a sergeant or maybe a patrolman when we started talking about this. The last thing any of us want to do is go hands-on. So that's something we've always trained on, and we continue to update and train on that. As far as body cameras, that's definitely not something anyone's opposed to. We all would welcome. It's a protection for us, actually. That's how we see it. The problem I see as an administrator is that it would be financially difficult. It would be, a huge undertaking as to who's going to download the video, how long do we have to store it, where do we store it.
Mm-hmm.
It would probably be a full-time job. Even if the size of the Natick Police Department, it would be a full-time job for someone to every single day collect the body cams from every shift and download and save and watch and critique. So, I mean, if it's going to be funded, we're on board, I'm sure. I'm not sure in this day and age it's going to get funded.
Thank you, Lieutenant Rossi. Lindsey?
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. I wanted to turn our attention a little bit to the schools. So Dr. Nolin, these next questions will be for you. We've received both through email and in the chat a lot of questions wanting to understand and know more about the school resource officer in the schools. In particular, why is there a need for an officer? What kind of contact does the officer have with students? How do Black students and students of color feel having a school resource officer? And would the Natick Public Schools look to remove that position from the school?
Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity. So Chief Hicks and I are close colleagues. We talk almost every day, and we talk about any incidents that cross our mutual desks. The school resource program, school resource officer program, is designed to avoid the very situations that I'm seeing listed in this chat here. So the idea of community policing, of which the SRO program is a piece of that, is designed to bust up this police to prison pipeline kind of idea that in the early 90s, when I was teaching in inner city New York, was very much front and center in the way that schools were managed. This law and order enforcement of actual day-to-day security and safety is where that research can sometimes be emergent from. But in a system like ours, Chief Hicks and I, through our memorandum of understanding, and Lieutenant Rossi as well, work really hard to ensure that we're not sending that kind of vibe through the school resource officer program, and that what it is doing is building trust and collaboration across sectors. Our SROs run programs, they run camps, they do trainings, they go into health classes. They are, for the most part, not uniformed, and they are not exuding that traditional law enforcement presence. We've been really intentional about that. I'm not going to sit here and say that no child is ever intimidated. I'm certainly not going to say to you that every student of color feels comfortable with that situation, and I would want to know about that if there was something happening, and the chief would want to know as well if there was something happening that was making students uncomfortable. I saw some pieces in the chat about students being expelled. There is no expelling out of Massachusetts schools anymore. So I guess I would encourage whoever's bringing that concern forward. I would want to hear from you about that situation. The state law does not allow us to expel someone unless a crime has been committed. And we're talking about felony crimes. And I need everybody to understand that schools serve all children, and period. And there's no more kicking kids out because of chronic discipline scenarios. Now, that doesn't mean that students don't have inequitable experiences within schools. We know that students and students of color do have higher levels of discipline. And that is something that we train around as a particular school system. And we actually, mandatory anti-bias training is required of all of our staff members. So of course it's never enough. So I would want to know if there were those particular situations. But related to the SRO program, that is not a policing function. Yes, if there is a school safety issue, they will respond in accordance with their role. But the schools are managed by the principals and their staff. And the SRO is adjunct to that and meant to be an enhancement around building collaboration and positive experiences with police. I don't know if the chief wants to add anything else there. You know, it would not be a positive idea in my mind to remove the SROs. However, I think we need to have a dialogue right now about what the impact of that situation is for our students of color if we have not heard that previously. Chief, I don't know if you want to add on to that.
Yes, and I think you covered all, but I'll start from my perspective and go day one. One of my first interviews and one of my first meetings when I came to Natick. Throughout my career, I've concentrated my efforts on youth and the juveniles of communities so that we avoid some of the things that I seen, especially earlier in my career, where it was, the youth of community were not valued. And what I say by that, it was something simple was arrest, send them to court. That really bothered me. It really did. So throughout my career, I've worked very hard to ensure that, youth of community, we educate, we teach, we give second chances, and the police department always has played a role in that. I understand some people say the police are the police, depending on as people see them. When they're in uniform, they're the police. And the police, unfortunately, in our society, and especially in this country, have always been seen as the enforcer. So we are the enforcer, when in fact we should be the guardian. We should be walking alongside are those that we see and work with and work for. And that's what we're trying to build up with the youth. Why is the SRO, School Resource Officer, so important? Is that it helps us to get there and to do that. And we have to be able to allow our youth and children of the community to understand the role of the police officer as the guardian, as the helper. And we have challenges. And the challenges, I don't believe, are in Natick. I think the challenges are all around us, as we've seen, especially in the last couple of weeks, where the news and social media are showing these pictures of what police are, and that's not what we want our children to grow up with, at least here in Natick. And this program helps us do that through the middle school and up through the high school. Some of the things that are important as a piece of that is that we have worked our way in conjunction with Dr. Nolin and the staff of the school. We do all we can to, as we say, educate and divert. Even now, we divert to educating through the school system as opposed to actions that could be considered criminal. Very few, if any, actions, especially in the last 2 years, by any of our school resource officers. So I feel the program is important to get to where we need to get to. And it's a tough time and a tough area we're in now based on what's being seen. But the value that those, and it's very specific officers who are chosen to do this, because not every officer has that capacity and capability. And through the staff of the school, those officers are handpicked to be in there. And they work in conjunction with the staff in the school, as Dr. Nolin said. So I feel the program is very important. I support it and continue to support it as one of the most important programs that we have, as well as some of the others that we talked about earlier, and we'll continue to support keeping them where in school as they are now.
Melissa, if I can just continue just for a little bit to say that there's been some pieces written in the chat box about social workers interacting with police, et cetera. That is the exact wraparound model that the schools and the police participate in. Community-based justice means that social workers, psychologists, behaviorists, police officers, vice principals, principals all work together to provide that snuggle around students and families so that we're getting them the most comprehensive care we possibly can. When a difficult situation comes to them, when a criminal situation comes to families, it may not come to the kid, it may come to the parents. So that kind of weaving around the child makes sure that they have more support. So, I mean, so that's one of the reasons that we're so close, we work so closely together. I would also say that there was a question about restorative justice that I saw. So Vice Principal Cole Harms was actually hired in large part for her extensive training in this area. And we have been providing those particular trainings wherever we can, having some of our younger students participate in restorative justice meetings at the elementary school. In the middle school, we've had a long-standing set of curriculum around social justice issues that every student must participate in. Can we get better and stronger? Absolutely, we can. There's always going to be more to lean into to do. This past year and a half has been particularly focused on combating microaggressions directly. And that's a very difficult thing to train around. It requires our staff to acknowledge things about their own racial dominant, white, privileged backgrounds, and then find a way to notice and interrupt racial aggressions in a systematic and consistent way. And this is most often when I see parents and students of color, it's because we have failed to do a good job with that. So we do want to hear about those issues because we need to grow into that, and we need to make sure that we readjust teachers' understanding or staff members' understanding of where things went well and they didn't. And I see a parent asking, you know, if something's happened to my child, who do we come to? I mean, typically it should be reported to the principal, but any of us in the school system are happy to meet to talk those things out. There are also anonymous ways to report situations. Those are hard to do if we can't track you down to ask any follow-up questions. You know, someone will say there was this racist incident, but we have no details and we can't follow up. So those are really hard, and then we're sitting with this knowledge that this yucky thing happened and we haven't been able to address it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nolin. I just wanted to take the opportunity to follow up with something that you started to touch upon. And this also came across to us through the email and through chat. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about how the Natick schools can fully commit to a curriculum that decenters whiteness, that addresses rooting out systemic racism. And with that said, what are the schools in particular doing to support our METCO families, and what can we as a community do better for those families?
Okay, well, those are two very different pieces. And I would also say not just METCO families, but our resident families of color as well. So let me put that one over here for a second. Related to curriculum that tells the full story of history and that roots out active anti-racism types of practices. We have an opportunity with the new social studies curriculum that's being implemented within the state to train around that. That's one of the reasons that we are pushing aggressively for all of our staff to receive the microaggression training and the difficult conversations about race training, because as we implement that new curriculum, K-12, which has a strong background and a strong opportunity to incorporate all issues of anti-racism and social justice, we want to make sure teachers actually have the comfort and capacity to have those conversations. It's not enough to simply put literature. It's not enough to simply have a unit on. There have to be teachers who are adept at cultivating the kinds of conversations that really help to heal racial issues and to push forward and make everyone learn how to combat racism as a matter of your public education. So we are doing that work. It's messy. We fail a lot. And oftentimes I am brought in to deal with situations where a teacher has tried to address X, they're not good at it, or they've got a blind spot due to their own privilege as a white educator. And we have to come on in and break that down and keep that conversation going. And we're not daunted by that. That's the work that you do when you're a public educator. And that's what you do when you're trying to build a socially just society. And so our teachers take that on. It's part of our strategic plan. And every year we update that plan. Natick Public Schools, right before closure, had put out a call to community members to serve on our equity committee. that committee would be auditing the practices, the literature, the units, the expectations, the trainings of the Natick Public Schools as a community, and asking for us to become stronger through that audit. So we will resurrect that process once we know exactly what school is going to look like coming shortly. So I ask everybody who's interested in this topic, who feels they could serve on this committee, and please note that we do need a diverse set of community members to participate in this, so that we can become stronger as a school community. That is also work that I know Ms. Salamoff has been promoting for the Board of Selectmen and for the town for a long time. Those types of committees really do build understanding. You know, I was a longstanding member in Framingham Public Schools when I taught there of the SEED program, the Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity. And it was transformative for me as a young teacher, and for me as a curriculum writer, and certainly for me as a leader in a public school system now. So those are the types of trainings that we are undertaking and have for some time. And we do also require graduate work of our staff in these areas so that they are getting both a theoretical and a practical grounding.
Great, thank you, Dr. Nolin. And I was hoping we could also take this opportunity to segue back to METCO, since that was a concern that had come back in the chat as well. In particular, how are we making our METCO families feel more included in the town?
Well, so one of the expectations that I have wanted to put forward with our METCO director for years is to expand our METCO program to begin at earlier ages in the system. Right now, our METCO program begins in the 5th grade, which is not typical. Most METCO communities begin at the kindergarten level, and that, as you know, if you've had children go through school, that's that yummy time where you meet all the parents and you get really connected in the community, and everybody's on a play date together, and you get swept up in the Natickness of it. When people come in the 5th grade year, there's always that sort of strange separation of coming together in middle school. The problem is that we've had such tight enrollment of late, and the state has had such difficult funding about the METCO program that they have only been able to barely give, the funding to sustain it, not to expand it. So that would certainly help to connect our METCO families. We try to do visits and PTO meetings to METCO. I go there 4 times a year to do various meetings and picnics and those kinds of things. We have learned a lot in closure about using virtual technologies to engage our Boston resident parents, and I hope that doesn't go away as we head into the next phases of learning. So those are the types of things that we do. We also provide a really amazing service to our METCO director, who's in contact with all families almost every week, either in written or in-person communication, to be that liaison between Natick and the public schools, so that there's always someone that a METCO family can say, oh, I know exactly who to go to get to this, or if she doesn't know, she'll get me the right person.
Thank you, Dr. Nolin. We're covering a lot of ground. And I did want to sort of go back to that point in terms of you just actively recruited for members of the community to participate on the equity plan for Natick Public Schools, as did, you had said Sue, select person, Salamoff also actively recruits to get diverse residents of color involved in town politics. I also want to put out there on behalf of Natick Is United, we would love to have more people of color involved in Natick Is United and other organizations in Natick. I do want to also set the record straight for this panel tonight, paying attention to what's going on in the chat and some of the Q&A. There are 3 people of color on this panel. So some people are wondering, there happen to be 3 light-skinned people of color. However, myself and 2 other people of color are on this panel, so it is not an all-white panel. I just want to put that out there for the record, to let people know that. So there is some diversity on the panel. And there are other ways that this panel is likely diverse that we might not even see. Because there are aspects of our identity that we don't see, and some that are hard to identify. However, now I'm paying attention to time and we're coming to the end of this discussion. We still have some questions that we do want to get to. I know that given the state of our nation, there are still some pressing topics that we have not yet addressed. There is one question that I would kind of like to sort of put out there that we're not really going to be able to at all answer tonight, but I kind of want to set the stage to explore how to move forward, to explore this issue in the future. Lindsey, you may know what question I'm sort of ramping ourselves up for.
Yeah, do you want me to jump in or do you want to take it away, Melissa?
No, I'll read it. So, and this question is sort of for everybody. And I may point to one person to start answering to begin, but the question is this, and it's asked in the spirit of envisioning a stronger, more inclusive Natick community that feels safe for all of us, especially for our residents of color, our Black residents, our residents of Asian descent. What steps might we take to create real structural changes in our town? And perhaps in our police department, to help Natick through these challenging times to a more secure future. What I'm asking is, how might we reimagine greater community partnerships with social services, mental health services, that we might begin to address the issue of perhaps reallocating resources in a way that's constructive and not divisive. Lindsey, I don't know if I've kind of captured the conversation that we were having last night.
No, I think you have, and I think this is kind of an opportunity for us to start what I think started percolating earlier on, especially with Chief Hicks, of, you know, if you could kind of give that spirit of a vision of what you are looking for our community, as Melissa said, to make it more inclusive for all. You know, what does that vision look like?
Where to start?
Yes.
Well, there's a lot of work to be done, and this is a time I feel we are in a position to start moving in that positive way. But understanding is hard work. One of the things I mentioned in my original statement is that it means difficult conversations. I think we've all been following the chats and we've all been following the question and answers. I made several notes here of things that I think that at least from the police department we can do to make sure that we are not only inclusive, but we are also open to the community. We have to be willing as public employees to listen, and even listen if it's something that we may not like. We have to be able to be open to different ideas, and it may sound simple, and I would say that our organization, my organization, does that, but clearly we need to do it more. We need to be transparent, especially from the police department. I say to my members, because we've had a lot of discussion within our department over the last 2 to 3 weeks. It's very difficult when you try to work very hard within your community, because we can only control our community and where we work. And the actions that clearly, even from our individual officers, look as clearly not conducive and not condoned in our profession, but yet we see it throughout this country. And it does affect us regardless. We don't like it, but it is a fact, and we have to work hard to ensure that our community, and we can say strongly, that's not us. So to be transparent, to be open to hearing those ideas which may be contrary, to be able to talk and discuss them, realizing that there are differences of opinions, but that doesn't mean those opinions are wrong. These are things that we need to do. Even for us, I know, talking about SRO, we need to discuss more about the SRO from the police perspective, making sure people know our policies and procedures. I looked at one of the questions that came up is demographics and data. So yes, we need to work on our data. What does our demographics look like? And we have started collecting data, but now we have to let people know we are collecting data. These are things I look at from the police department standpoint, and we know this is work we continue to do. We continue to work to be ahead of the curve of what we want to be a better police department. We want to work with our community. As far as a community, we have many obstacles that we look at as being systematic. In other words, we look to say we're going to depend on one group, whether it's the Board of Selectmen is going to fix this or the schools are going to fix this, and that's not how it's going to work. And this is my editorial opinion here, is that it's going to take, and I'm seeing this, to be quite honest, a movement of coming together and saying that we want to make this happen. But every time we come together and say we're going to make it happen, it's going to be everyone who's going to have to step up and put the time in. And putting the time in is to continue to let your voice be heard, and at the same time say that I'm going to do the work to make sure that this gets done. And that's the hard part. But I think that we're in a time in our country where I see a difference in the momentum, is probably the best way to look at it. I think the momentum is different now, and it's time to push it forward. And many may think that it's been tough before and they've stopped. I don't see this stopping. I think we have a responsibility as public entities, as people who work for the public and with the public, to make this happen and to listen to what's happening. And the questions in the chats are very good questions and very good chats. And there's work to be done, and there's going to be follow-up. I know with Natick Is United, who I'm very proud of being with, because of the work that they put in. They don't mind having the tough conversations, and even in our leadership meetings, there's tough conversations to be had, and it's expected. And I just hope that's what we have going forward, and turn those conversations into action. And as we move forward, it's hard. It's not going to be easy. But from what I see here and the issues that are coming up and the concerns that people have, I have confidence that we're going to start moving this forward even more than we have in the past. So that's my editorial piece.
If I might just add on to what my chief has to say. So he's a much more eloquent speaker than I am, but I'm just going to tell you my personal feelings. The past couple of weeks have been really, really hard. It's been really hard for the members of the police department to keep coming to work and keep doing what we always have done and trying our best. And this Thursday, the chief and I are meeting with a person of color from the community that reached out via email. It was actually our social media platform, in a private message, and asked to speak to us. And it never occurred to me as a white woman, because I said, well, we're not getting complaints from the minority community. There must be nothing wrong. But it never occurred to me that they're not feeling comfortable coming to us. That may be the issue all along. I apologize. So this person reached out, this wonderful family, and we're going to go meet with them on Thursday, the chief and I, at their home and have a conversation because they're not sure what to tell their children because they respect the Natick police and they like the Natick police and they're struggling with what they're seeing all around them through the media and social media. So to say that these past couple weeks have been a growth opportunity for all of us is a complete understatement. It's been life-changing. Personally, professionally, we have a ton of work to do, all of us. It's not just the police. And it's so encouraging for me because I was honestly coming onto this tonight feeling like we were going to be attacked as police officers because that's the feeling that we've had. And I apologize, Chief, for editorializing this, but this is the feeling that we've had as a profession for the past couple of weeks. But it's so encouraging to see that we all want to work together, that it's not, against us. It's bringing us in and giving us a seat at the table for change. And that's all we want. We want to be a part of the change that needs to happen, not just in our community or not just in our state, but throughout this entire country. And, we're very fortunate to have the leader that we have in our department, the leadership we have in our town, and we're committed. I can tell you that every single one of us at the Natick Police Department are committed to being part of change that needs to happen. So I just want to extend my gratitude for being a part of this opportunity tonight to speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Rossi. And I think talking about the spirit of collaboration and community and working together is so incredibly important. So I would like to also now turn it over to our Board of Selectmen members. Sue, I see that you have your hand up. If you could unmute, we'd love to hear from you, and Karen a little bit more.
Okay. First of all, I appreciate what everybody has said tonight and that we've actually had this opportunity. As part of the vision, I just urge you have to get involved in the government. I think if we look at what's happening with the Congress in Washington, what a difference it makes with the House of Representatives that we now have in Washington. Our town benefits from the volunteerism of this community. Granted, I'm a white person that came here, but I came to Natick 48 years ago, and I saw our government wasn't working very well. And I learned about how you could change your government from the League of Women Voters and just began to talk to everybody and get them to say we need to study our government and how we can make it better. And there wasn't much happiness from the community that I moved into that I was trying to seek change. But I've seen over these 48 years, after school daycare, the Center for Arts in Natick, the soccer club, Natick Community Farm, the golf course. We all have to participate in order to make the change that we need to have. I can assure you that, and I'm very comfortable that the Board of Selectmen is doing its part by appointing the folks that have now applied for committees. We have far more diverse committees in Natick than when I first moved here. I see in our department heads, we have a more diverse population, but we all have to be part of it. We can say what's wrong, but we now have to work to make it better. And I think we have the community that can do it.
Thank you. Thank you, Select Person Salamoff. Select Person Adelman-Foster, would you like to add?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I guess two things. I think that first of all, if the three people who've just spoken have sort of said it all. So I'm just going to give a couple of footnotes. One, that we have great nonprofits in this town doing, great work. And I think it's time for the government also to have an official entity of one kind or another that will look to issues of inclusion and diversity and equity. And that's something that Selectman Salamoff and I are working on together, and we'll be bringing back to the board as a whole, just to start talking about what kind of structure would be correct. And I think we'd be very interested in people's input. Other towns our size have civil rights commissions. There are various ways to approach it. But I think it's something that the time has come to have something that is actually part of our government that looks at these issues. That's one thing. And the other is just to pull the camera back just a little bit. I think part of this conversation has to be why Natick has only 2% Black people. And that goes back to a really shameful, long history of redlining and not allowing. I mean, we have proud things about race as well in this town. Don't get me wrong, but there's been a long history of Black families not being able to, or not feeling able to, or not feeling welcome, or not being able to afford to live in Natick for a variety of reasons. And so part of what we can do, and part of I think what we have to do, is make sure that we are saying yes to affordable housing so that more people can live here, and start seeking out opportunities to make our community more welcoming, and able to be moved to in just the really basic monetary ways. It's not a it's not a footnote that I don't remember exactly what the statistic is, that the net worth of the average Black family, and maybe misquoting this, is $8. And that's an astounding thing. And we, I think, have a pretty big obligation to make sure that people can move here who have not been able to move here for the last decades and hundreds of years. That's it.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Nolin, I would love to get your perspective from the schools where you would like to see some serious structural changes happening for the school system or for Natick at large.
One of the young people in the chat, I assume it was a young person, asked me, how often do you listen to youth of color, and have you done anything about what you've heard there? And I just want to say that I have focus groups with students a lot. My focus groups with students of color over the last several years have prompted the racial microaggression trainings that we have put forward. They also encourage me to prioritize the hiring of leaders of color, and my last 4 leadership hires in my cabinet and across our leadership positions have been Black leaders for that reason. We have prioritized the hiring of Black and Hispanic and Asian teachers of color in our strategic plan. The time for us is action. We have embraced a social justice curriculum for a long time, and this moment in time allows us for students to take what they study in theory and apply it in real life. And what that means, though, as a community that loves each other and learns together, is that we are going to make mistakes together, and we cannot just obliterate everyone who makes a mistake ever. and that we have to stay in relationship enough to fight it as a community. So that means better policies around fighting racism, microaggression policies. That means what Karen Adelman-Foster just said, which is ensuring that transportation allows access for everyone in our community. Same for bilingualism, making sure that students and families of all languages are able to access the meetings, the opportunities, the jobs in our community. It means promoting people of color. It means white people stepping out of their comfort zone and leaning into tough conversations, but it also means that the community of color can't call for everyone to be removed from the community if individuals are making mistakes on that journey. And that's the tough part of educating, that there's going to be missteps and we have to push forward when it's hard. Doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean it's easy, but we're push forward with that. We have to make policies about what cultural celebrations we put forward as a town. What do we prioritize? Do we equally celebrate all cultures? And if we're not, then we need to make sure that we're embracing movement towards that, so all types of families feel comfortable here. And always, I think these types of civic dialogues are the key. Staying in relationships means doing hard things together. And I hope that's what Natick continues to do.
Thank you so much. On behalf of Natick Is United, I want to again thank all of our panelists for their attendance tonight. When we said we wanted to vision a dialogue happening in the wake of George Floyd's death, everyone came to participate and really want to start bridging some of those conversations, both as an opportunity to celebrate what we are doing well, but also to kind of expose the areas where we do have those blind spots, where we've taken missteps, and what we need to do to move forward and better the town of Natick. And no panel would be complete without a few calls to action. And so I do hope that you will join Natick Is United in these next few steps that we're looking for. First and foremost, we have put a survey in the chat. We welcome your feedback on tonight's programming and what you would like to see in the future. And secondly, as Selectwoman Salamoff said, voting and getting involved is one of the best things that you can do and the first starting point. So for those of you who are not aware, there is a town election coming up on June 30th. It is really important that we get out and vote. Given the circumstances of this pandemic, however, you have the ability to vote by mail. All of that information is on the town's website at natick.gov. So again, we hope that you will join there, and please make sure that you like Natick Is United on Facebook. That way we can disseminate the latest information to you. And again, stay tuned and also subscribe to the newsletter for more information. Again, I want to say my deep gratitude of thanks for everyone who was involved tonight. We are so grateful for your vision. We are so grateful for your honesty, and we're so grateful to start the beginning of many wonderful and difficult and critical conversations.